am Celeste Freeman, one of the co-curators for LexArt's Black History Month celebration of Margaret Tulip, Free Not a Slave exhibit. We are so excited at being able to give you a virtual tour today that will include everything from cloth and textiles, student artwork, just a gamut of really fascinating, interesting topics related to unknown Black women history in Lexington. So let's get started. First, I want to thank Matthew Siegel, the director of LexArt, who made this space available to us for this wonderful exhibit. We're going to have a few words of introduction in just a minute, and we'll get started.
Thank you, Celeste. I'm Matthew Siegel. I'm Executive Director of LexArt, and I'd just like to say hello and welcome to Margaret Tulip, Free and Not a Slave. Very excited to be able to give the gallery to LexMedia to present their research. Their wonderful team of curators and researchers to present their work over the last year and a half on the lives and the stories of Black women in Lexington. And I'd just like to say, please come visit. It's a wonderful show, compelling story of Margaret Tulip. I'd like to introduce the president of LexMedia, Jessie Steigerwald.
Hi, I'm Jessie Steigerwald, and really glad to welcome you here. And I'm here with Stacy Frazier. Hello. Hello. So we learned about Margaret Tulip. LexMedia learned about Margaret Tulip through the exhibit at Lexington Historical Society. And back when we launched our effort to make a new monument in Lexington, Margaret Tulip really stood out as one of the women whose stories we would want to learn more about. So just wondering how you learned about Margaret Tulip.
Sure. Yeah, we were preparing for an exhibit a few years ago, the exhibit that's currently running at Buckman Tavern, Something Must Be Done, Bold Women of Lexington. And we were trying to incorporate as many stories as we could in a logical way and in a way that gave us the chance to talk about each of the women in depth. And Ed Bell from Mass Historical Commission reached out to us and said, you know, there's this really interesting story of a woman named Margaret from Lexington who sued for her freedom. And that was kind of the sentence that started it all. We were immediately intrigued. You know, the exhibit team was very interested in her story. We tried to do the exhibit, we tried to do the best we could for her within the exhibit, but we had 20-something other women to research, and we knew that there was more, to be picked up in terms of doing her research. And so we were really, really happy when LexMedia said, hey, she sounds really interesting. We want to do something with Margaret. And then they were able to do a lot of research and fill in her story, which was amazing.
Well, it's so nice for LexMedia to be able to build on your work because you brought forward women's names where we've heard repeatedly. People say, I grew up in Lexington, I focus on history, and I did not know these amazing women were here, from Peggy Kimball, the pilot, through scientists and educators, abolitionists, suffragists. These stories are so important. So Margaret Tulip really stood out, and Leslie Masson volunteered to do research. And so she started going into the court records, and I have here the jury finding from Margaret Tulip for her case and the ultimate judgment wherein she was found to be a free woman and not a slave. So just briefly, and you should come in to both places and see the shows for yourself. Margaret Tulip was born to her mother, Kate, and she was given away when she was 3 weeks old. She was then traded for a colt, a young horse, when she was 5 months old. And then she came to Lexington as a very young enslaved person. And at some point, she became legally free. So she had a period of enslavement and then was legally free. But she claimed her freedom a little later in life. And then after she had a child, she had a couple children, she was married, and she was then re-enslaved by Amos Muzzy. So we'll talk about Amos Muzzy a little bit later. But part of what we've been trying to figure out in terms of what did it take for her as a woman who was very much a part of Lexington to literally be essentially kidnapped by someone in the neighborhood where everybody knew her and everybody knew that suddenly now she was enslaved again. Right. It's a big question.
It's a big question. I think it must have been, one of the central questions in her life where she was, obviously she was dealing with this, and it was so personal for her to go from enslaved to free and then have that changed, basically have someone trying to change her status.
And part of the fact that women are so not visible in the landscape in Lexington and many other places, but you don't drive by and see signs saying Margaret Tulip lived here, or this is where this woman had this major accomplishment. what we're trying to do with the Monument Project is kind of put women out into the landscape where we can see them. And so what we have had to do is think about, where did she live? What did she wear? What did she look like? And so over here we've got a dress that has been sewn to help us think about what Margaret actually might have worn. So it was hand stitched by my mom, Corinne. Thanks, Mom. Amazing work. And it is done to be historically accurate. So behind me, there's a pattern for the 18th century English gown. The pattern was made by Steph Smith and Helly Larkin. And they made this by actually traveling around, including all the way to London, England, and looking at existing dresses. They took a real dress apart with permission, and they actually figured out, how did people make these dresses? So there's a lot to be learned there, and we encourage people to come in and take a look at the dress. But when you see the dress, for some people it's shocking. It's very colorful. There's stripes. Why is there a scarf with flowers on it? But in fact, that's really what it would have looked like. People actually had color, and they wore stripes and patterns, and fabric was really important when we think about American history, right? So the king increased taxes on imported cotton that was very comfortable, and then people here started spinning their own goods in protest.
Yep, and very much sort of a let's learn this skill in order to make a point, basically. They were a lot of women in the 1760s, early 1770s really weren't regularly spinning anymore. They were buying imported goods. We're close enough to Boston that those things are relatively available, even in the 18th century. But it was really a choice to say, okay, well, let's learn how to make homespun again so that we can, make a point about it, basically.
Exactly. So over here we've got a beautiful picture of Margaret Tulip as a student imagined her. And so my co-curator, Celeste, is going to show you some other student work.
So one of the really fun, exciting parts of doing this project is having time to think about the fact that we don't have any pictures of Margaret Tulip. We don't really have a sense of a diary from her that exists to say, what does she do day to day? So we were able to engage a number of students to use their own creativity and imaginations to sort of think about what would she be doing. So this project behind me is artwork by Hannah, a Diamond Middle School student who brilliantly just imagined her being a seamstress or doing some work with sewing. And I can almost picture Margaret blowing out the candle or putting her needle down. That's how detailed the work is. We're guessing that most women obviously had to know how to sew and take care of many household items around clothing. So this was a reasonable expectation of an image that very well could be based on actual facts. But really impressed with the artwork in detail. We've also been asked a lot about what did Margaret do to earn a living or wage once she was emancipated or recognized as being free by the court system here. And it's pretty reasonable to assume that she may very well have been a seamstress or done some mending in order to support her family and earn some sense of economic security. So we're going to show you some more student artwork. Now remember, a few months ago, many of us, including me, had never heard the name Margaret Tulip. And we thought no detail was too insignificant. So one of our students at Hastings, Alana, made a tribute to her through her last name, which is Tulip. And the expression we used was, we're bringing her her flowers, we're celebrating her. So we just started with that piece because it's really important just to say, we see you, we want to know more. And that's what this little portrait represents for us. So the student artwork behind me, again, are imaginings of her across several spans of life. The most important for me is thinking about her as a young child who's being handed off as a newborn at 3 weeks of age, away from her mother, and then shifted from, we believe, from Woburn to Lexington. So one of our elementary students at Hastings actually did a collaborative work of imagining Kate, her mom, holding Margaret as a newborn for the very last time, which I think is a very moving image to sort of hold in one's mind. And then as we shift over, more elementary work of her as a young toddler, and from what my understanding is, imagining if she could actually express what she may have been feeling as she was shifted from one home to another. So you see a picture of her as a young girl looking very emotional and very obviously grief-stricken for any number of reasons. Further are works by middle school students, just again imagining her as a young woman and again depicting her doing some work as a seamstress, which makes sense again. We're thinking about, again, what did women do to sustain themselves economically, to support their family? What was the range of options open? And definitely sewing was one of them. All right, we're here at the last exhibit of actual student artwork, but I want to say a couple of things. One of which is that a few students, grades 3 to 5 at Mariah Hastings and I believe grades 7 and 8 at Diamond Middle School, learned a lot about Margaret Tulip through me and through Mr. Coombs, who's a teacher at Diamond. And those students volunteered to do some artwork for this project. So the student involvement for me really has centered the entire exhibit. It's the thing that most people are actually responding to and commenting on, and I just find it moving no matter how many times I come in and see the actual artwork. So that being said, I also want to acknowledge a couple of other things. Is that to my, I think it's the rear of me, you're going to see a banner about Indigenous history as we know it in terms of the long arch of time. And we thought it was really important that people not just walk in and think, we're talking about 50 years, 60 years in just a very short window. And when you think about Native American groups and tribes in this area, we're talking about thousands of years. Still here, by the way, very much still here and still thriving. But our window of time is a very narrow one. So what you see here is a final work of art by a 4th grade student at Hastings, who we have no idea, again, what Kate, Margaret's mother, looked like. We do believe she was partially indigenous, so it makes sense to have her next to the banner, recognizing the long arc of indigenous history in Massachusetts, I should say in this country. But the student just to sort of imagine what she looked like, chose colors that I think are just incredibly beautiful and striking on her skin. But we also intentionally placed her in direct location with a member of the Muzzy family. So the history here is a little bit complicated in that we know that Kate and the Muzzies probably never met. We're pretty sure Kate never saw Margaret once she had her taken from her as an infant. But we're just sort of, with our own creative juices, thought, what if Kate could speak to one of her child's enslavers? What would that conversation look like, sound like? And I just on our own just imagining. So Amos Muzzy Jr., not Sr., is actually here in this frame. He's a descendant of Amos Muzzy Sr., who at some point did purchase Margaret as a young child. So again, I love this exhibit because it's not really just a neat, tidy time frame. It is both creative energies. It's also including some other history that I didn't know about in terms of Black women here in Lexington as well. But I thought it was great to sort of end on this section, just imagining if Kate could speak, what would she say?
We were able to include Mary Elizabeth Miles Bibb when we set up the show, which was really excellent to be able to bring her story forward. Mary Elizabeth grew up in Rhode Island. She was a free Black woman, and she was interested in becoming a teacher. And the Lexington Normal School was one of the first public teachers' colleges in Massachusetts, and it was the only one to be exclusively for women. So Mary Elizabeth came here and lived right here in Lexington. She went to the normal school. The building is still standing. And she had an amazing life after she graduated. She went on to be a teacher in Albany, New York, in Cincinnati, Ohio, and in Boston. She met and married Henry Bibb, who had been enslaved in the South. He escaped and was giving tours and talking as a speaker, and was well known for his storytelling. In fact, his recountings of his own experience were published as a book. They escaped and left America in 1850 after the fugitive slave laws were passed. They became refugees in Canada. And once she was there, she opened schools. She was one of the first people to establish schools in Canada that included Black and white students. She also worked with Henry, her husband, to establish a newspaper called Voice of the Fugitive. And so we have been so lucky to get to have more understanding of her life. And again, though, there's no pictures of her. We have one photograph of her husband, Henry, and no pictures of her. So we've had to interpret, again, through textiles, what might she have worn. In the photograph of Henry, he's very well dressed. And so you can see here a picture, that dress that's an accurate representation of what somebody would have worn in 1843 when she was at the normal school here in Lexington.
So we also know it's very likely, I should say, that Ms. Bibb actually did most of the work on the abolitionist paper, The Fugitive. So again, we have elementary students from Hastings who did two things that I absolutely love. One, just again, bringing a face to someone that we don't have a face for, Mary Elizabeth Bibb, but also depicting a copy of the newspaper, but imagining if she could actually put her name on as editor versus her husband's name, and having to, I would say, hide her talents behind that because of societal norms. So I love this section for a lot of different reasons. It captures things that, again, I was not familiar with in terms of Lexington or her ties to Lexington here. So take a good look.
And the more we know, the better we are able to share these stories and bring them forward. It's been wonderful having a partnership with Lexington Historical Society because they brought so many women's stories to the fore, and we've been able to really celebrate that. So whether it's Black History Month or it's Women's History Month or you're watching this at another time, we would love to have people who are interested in sharing this research join us at Lex See Her.
Hey everyone, my name is Carol Ward. I'm the Executive Director of the Lexington Historical Society. I'm so thrilled today to be in the gallery at LexArt that we partnered with Lex See Her and LexArt on this amazing exhibition. And I'm new to town. I've been Executive Director of the Society for about 6 months now. And I'm so thrilled that Jesse and Lex See Her asked us to partner on this exhibit for a lot of different reasons. First of all, it's Black History Month. We want to make sure that we represent everyone and all histories, especially female histories, throughout time. And one of the main things that I want to focus on at the Historical Society is bringing the contemporary and the historic together. Because we talk a lot about history 200 years ago, but yesterday was history. So how do we really incorporate that into the stories that we tell at our 3 historic sites and throughout town? So a couple of the objects that we're looking at behind me are historic silhouettes, and we have silhouettes from the 17th century, 18th century, 19th century in our collection at the Historical Society. Interesting fact, these silhouettes actually date till after the camera was invented. So why do we have silhouettes still working out instead of having photographs of women? And that's really because women were still seen as lesser than men, and silhouettes were a way to showcase women as kind of this perfect object, not so much them and their personality. So we have these paired so smartly with an example of Kara Walker's work. Everyone knows Kara Walker, amazing contemporary artist, using silhouettes to really talk about difficult subjects like enslaved people, slavery in general, and the really interesting power dynamics between men and women. So this is what I love to see in an exhibition: historic objects matched with contemporary art. And that's something that we're going to be doing more and more at the Historical Society as we go through the next few years, working on a project at the Depot. More info on that coming soon. Also, for Lex See Her, they created these amazing banners that you've seen throughout town, utilizing silhouettes as the theme, and again, representing women throughout history. The culmination of kind of Lex See Her's mission is an amazing monument that's going to hopefully be seen in about 2 years or so. And Meredith Bergman, world-renowned artist, is going to be the sculptor for that. And this is one of her preliminary sketches. She's working on sketches and maquettes right now. And this piece will be made out of bronze in a bas-relief, showcasing about 20 women throughout the history of Lexington. So again, I am so excited to be a part of the ongoing female history of Lexington as the new director of the Society.
As the exhibit winds down, the project continues, so the research on Margaret Tulip and other Black women and women in general in Lexington is continuing. Lex See Her has a research team that meets every Monday night, and people are able to get involved. You can email us at lexmonument@gmail.com, and there's so many more stories that we can tell, which is delightful. The other thing we're doing is we are continuing our exciting partnership with Lexington Historical Society to do another tableau reenactment of the 1769 spinning protest. And so to do that, we have something called Tied to Her Apron Strings, where we are making aprons, like you saw here today in the gallery on Margaret Tulip's dress. We're making aprons to help us really get in touch with a connection with these real women who were here in Lexington in the 1760s and 1770s. So we've started with Black women based on some of the research from Anne Grady, Margaret Michelet, and other people who have been doing research at the Society. And you've been spending a lot of time on reinterpreting Black history. So 2 things. 1, the aprons, because there's a beautiful apron here. And then 2, we're really interested in following the work the Society is doing.
Yeah, it's been really exciting seeing, this project come together. As we said, Margaret's story itself, but also the expansion into Mary and, some of the other people you've been able to talk about. I love the idea of the apron project, and, we were thinking about when we were thinking about what to bring to this exhibit, what to loan. Something like an apron or a pocket or something like that is very intimate, it's very personal. A lot of it can be very practical, like if you come down, see the exhibit, if it's still open during that time, you've got very workaday aprons and very fancy aprons. And this is an example we have with many different kinds of embroidery on the apron. And as Celeste talked about, Margaret may have done something like mending or sewing in order to support herself, and that would have been, restricted to a more basic stitch, something basically to hold the clothing together. Something like this would have had to have been done by somebody who had the luxury to learn decorative stitches, the time to actually do something like that. So less likely to have been, an enslaved woman or a Black woman who was trying to earn her living as a free woman, and more likely to have belonged to a white woman. But so much of what we can tell from the aprons can tell us a little bit about the person because they are such a personal object.
And we've really appreciated thinking about this particular item because an apron can be very simple and practical, or it can be extremely decorative and just a work of art in itself. One thing that's been a challenge is that regular people, middle-class people or midland people and poorer people, enslaved people, their clothing got worn and worn and worn and mended and passed on until there was really nothing left but rags for the ragman. And those rags even were turned into paper by people who were doing printing presses. So there aren't a lot of material objects that we can look at and study. However, it's been really fun learning how to make them. So people who want to get involved in the apron project, again, can email us at lexmonument@gmail.com. And there's actually video tutorials, and we will get you set up so you can make an apron, even if you can't come to the reenactment, although we hope you can. It's August 31st, and we're celebrating the actual reenactment from 1769. Part of what's been so really special about collaborating with the Society, with Lex Art, and that Lex Seher has really enjoyed is a feeling that we're coming together as a community. And we've thought a lot about our past right at the day of the battle, but women were here the whole time, from indigenous ancestry women all the way forward to today, and every little way we can do it, whether it's a diary, reading something, sewing something. Building these connections, I know for me, has really made me feel just like I better appreciate our place and time.
Yeah, and I think that's so much of what we're trying to do. As Carol mentioned at the Historical Society and with our work with Lex Seher, that idea of helping everyone understand who lived in Lexington, and that isn't constrained necessarily. In the past, it's been more constrained by who was recorded. As we said, we have our portrait of Amos, but we don't have anything of Kate or Margaret, and so there are reasons, resource access, things like that, why people were represented. But really trying to expand the story and looking at things like Jack and Dinah, who were 2 enslaved people who lived at the Hancock Clark house with Reverend Jonas Clark and John Hancock's cousin Lucy, who was Jonas Clark's wife. So one thing we're working on this spring is reinterpreting and bringing to life some of those stories of Jack, Dinah, and other enslaved people who were involved with this community, as integrally as some of the names that we know more than the names that we're discovering now.
And it's great. Anne Grady is going to be sewing an apron for Dinah, which is really great. And people who want to get involved, please come get involved. Go over to Buckman Tavern if you haven't already. Make sure that you see the Something Must Be Done, Bold Women of Lexington exhibit, because it certainly inspired Lex Seher, and there's a lot of interesting women that you have lifted up and brought forward who definitely we just wouldn't have known about. So we're grateful, and we are excited that people are able to come into the gallery. Stay tuned, follow us, look for us online at lexseher.com, and get involved with the Monument Project. It's going to be a very exciting 2 years.